Hello and welcome to Citizens Forum. This is being filmed on Tuesday, February the 3rd in the Memorial Arena in Victoria. I'd like to start by thanking the Shaw staff and our volunteer crew that makes the show happen. So the first part of Citizens Forum is always the Walter and Jack show. I'll start off. Today, our Canada's Foreign Minister, John Baird, stood down, he said, from cabinet, and he's going to resign his seat. I heard a fair bit about it on the radio, and I heard him talk, and to me, he sounded like a real politician. In other words, I will do what I am told by the corporations that run our country, and to hell with the people of Canada. And there are lots of politicians like that. But there's also lots of politicians we fervently hope who are not like that. John Baird, I think, and I mean, he's a mainstay of the Harper government. They've done a lot of things that Canadians don't want. And they've misled us about those things, they've lied to us about those things, they've tricked us, and basically they've worked on behalf of corporate Canada. So for John Baird or anybody, to come out and just say how it's all about Canada and all about Canadians, that's not what they do in real life, because they don't do the most fundamental thing, which is to honor our democracy. They laugh at us, they mock us, they insult us, they don't care about democracy. And that's the way our country is being run today. And it's a real shame, and it's extremely dangerous, because we're not going to survive it if it doesn't change. That's that.
We usually give a couple of examples, like for instance, what happened in the Ukraine and how Canada supported that. It was really a fascist coup that took over Ukraine on behalf of the West. In the Middle East, John Baird's always been very, very pro-Israeli government policies, and really supported them in the occupation of lands that they stole and all that. And the thing is that, there was a time when Canada did have an image of being a peacemaker that would go to some of these regions and act as conciliators and try to find common ground. But now we're invaders. We take a side and we send our soldiers, and really often on false pretenses, like in Syria, and drawn us into really is a sort of a fake war against a fake enemy. That's the John Baird that we're talking about, and we have to wonder what's up. Here we are about 8 months before the election, perhaps, if it goes in the fall. John Baird's stepping down, he's resigning. I would say perhaps he's kind of not going to wear anything that happens in this election, and probably will resurface as the new leader of the Conservative Party after the election, and perhaps Harper's going to be stepping down then. So I don't think we've seen the end of that guy.
And we should remember that John Baird got his start with the Mike Harris government in Ontario, which was really a corporate-supported government that feasted on attacking and damaging, especially the poor. That's who Harris went after, and really it was that time in Canadian history when the poor were really not the poor. The middle class was under attack to create the poor, and they've done it. They've successfully done that, and now the poor are growing and will continue growing because of the economic assault we're under, led by the same people who control the Conservative government, and that's the corporations who run the country. What a mess.
Well, let's look at a mess and a local mess.
Yeah.
I mean, kind of a good news story. The administration of the city of Sandage, in their great wisdom, have now decided to remove the spyware off the mayor's computer, and kind of by coincidence, they made that decision on the same day that the Privacy Commissioner launched her investigation on January 20th, and we didn't hear about it until a couple of days ago. So they waited 10 or 11 days to announce that they had removed the spyware, but it did happen on the same day that the privacy commissioner launched her investigation. And she, from the statements we've seen so far, she is really going to side on the side of the mayor. And in my view, to shorten the story up, this is an attack on a new mayor by the council, by the administration, and with some help from the police chief. It really looks like that.
And certainly the media.
And with the help of the corporate media. Now, the media has been so soft on the reporting on this. And by the way, that's how they get away with this, because there's no real scrutiny. But now the spyware is off his computer, and there's a lot of statements now that they're going to move ahead and get the business of running the municipality and stuff done, and we're all supposed to forget about this little coup that they pulled off, or tried to pull off. But Saanich Council are going to get a rude awakening, I think, because I think memories are not that short. And when it comes to the next election, there's going to be a lot of people remembering just how two-faced this council was. And I think there's going to be a lot of shuffling. A lot of people are going to get shuffled off that council, and for good reason. They really did something that was unfair and unjust, and did attack the mayor's liberties, as well as attacked all our liberties, because he was just fighting for his privacy rights. Now, we'll have to wait a couple of months to see what the privacy commissioner has to say, but I think this story is not going to just blow away like the council wishes it would.
It's sure a question about what the hell is going on in Saanich. I mean, who runs the place, and on whose behalf is it being run? I mean, there seem to be some very strange things going on, and one of them was sewage, sewage treatment, a $1 billion issue that was going to do us absolutely zero environmental good. There was, given the proposal that was in place, what they were planning to do, it seems that we would be lucky to even break even environmentally, and at a cost of $1 billion. And Saanich Council was one of the biggest supporters of that project from the get-go. They helped move it ahead, even though I don't think the people of Saanich necessarily were supportive of that proposal. The Saanich Council basically almost voted en masse. Vic Derman, I think, was the one, from the beginning, all he wanted was a fair, honest, open, and intelligent process, and that was impossible to get on this issue, which is a very scary thing.
Yes, and I mean, of course, a lot of this stuff is operated through the back rooms, and the CRD operates in a shroud of mystery. Nobody hardly knows what the CRD is. So there's an old boys network going on for sure, and it seems to be centered around Saanich and Saanich Council, and I think a lot of people have had enough. And it's hard to tell, are they liberals or the NDPers? It really doesn't seem to matter. There's a lot of political party influence on the council. And that's what I'm advocating, why I'm advocating for the CRD to be elected, Jack. Just run an election and elect these guys so they can't hide behind this layer of bureaucracy that they laid in front of us.
And even more than that, I think we need rules that make the politicians and the political parties accountable to us. And I think we can make these rules. To do this, we need the information that comes from an honest media, so we've got to have that. And we need rules to force our politicians to vote the way that we want them to vote. They should not be voting the way, provincially it's the party leaders that tell them what to do, and federally it's the party leaders that tell them what to do. Municipally, it seems to be almost the staff and the people who run the city, whoever those people may be, they're telling our city councillors what to do. And that's not the way it's supposed to be. They should be finding out, they should be making sure, locally, they should make sure that we fully know the information that there is to be known about the important issues. And then they should find out what we want, and there's ways of doing that. You know, there's focus groups and polling and other things as well. You find out what the public wants, and then you try to do it. That's supposed to be what democracy is all about. And we are so far off of that at every level of our government. And if we can't change that, it definitely looks like we're going down the drain.
Do you want me to bring up another one? Kind of municipal politics also. In Duncan, the Duncan Council has passed the Declaration for the Rights of their Citizens. And I'll just read what the council passed. They recognize that all people have a right to live in a healthy environment, which includes the right to breathe clean air, the right to drink clean water, the right to consume safe food, the right to access nature, the right to know about the pollutants and contaminants released into the local environment, and the right to participate in decision-making that will affect the environment. So it was moved and seconded and passed just recently in January in Duncan.
It's wonderful. It's beautiful.
Wonderful. The Suzuki Foundation spearheading what they call the Blue Dot movement, and they're bringing this resolution to municipalities. I believe they're going to do it across the country. And I think it's a really good start, Jack. It just dovetails with what you were just saying, where the council has to get back and focus on what we're talking about here. Are they representing these values when they try to jam this lunatic idea about the sewage treatment plant? They had no science to support that, and they were going to do bad things to our environment. If they pass this resolution, they'll have to read it over carefully before they try something like that again. So that's, I think, a really good news story.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I hope to hear more about this, and especially maybe happening here in town. I just want to mention briefly the corporate media coverage of the ISIS murder of the 2 Japanese men very recently. The massive coverage given those murders compared to the almost zero coverage that they've given to the entire issue of the nuclear meltdowns at Fukushima, which happened, I don't know, a couple of years ago now. And I mean, literally, nuclear death is spreading around the world. This is the most poisonous things that ever created by humankind. A disaster happened that all the corporations and all the politicians and all the media always told us this could never happen. Meltdowns can't happen. They had like 4 or 5 of them a couple of years ago in Fukushima, Japan. And since then, the media has absolutely refused to even mention it. It's absolutely unbelievable. The nuclear cores melted down. They still don't know where they are. I mean, even that, they can't find them because it's impossible. They're basically melted down into the earth, and who knows what's happening. These things are deadly for, I mean, we're going to need a miracle to pull us out of this. And the politician, my understanding is the Canadian government, when that happened, stopped testing for nuclear radiation. That's the way the game is played here. It's completely crazy.
It's very, very dangerous because we're having a hard time finding out just what are the levels of radioactivity in the environment. And when the government behaves that way, it doesn't exactly instill trust into the public. You know, this is one of the most serious environmental threats, immediate environmental threats we have on the planet right now. The fact that it's not being talked about is very, very troubling.
And instead, they keep telling us that the great enemy is ISIS, 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 but they never say that a lot of responsible writers, researchers, journalists around the world are saying that ISIS is funded by, started by, controlled by, and run by the United States. Now, I don't know if that's the case, but given my history of living on and seeing what they've done, I think it's very possible. And the fact that here locally, even though we mention, or I mention over and over again, every couple of weeks, about the fact that corporate America funded Adolf Hitler and the Nazis to get them started in the early days. you know, when Hitler was just a glow in some American Nazi's heart. And yet, none of the media here will report that. At the very moment in time when the next enemy, the next Hitler, which is ISIS, is being created very possibly by these same people. I mean, you have to start to ask yourself, what kind of lunacy is ruling this country? And are we going to make it through to the other side unless we can make some big changes at the very top?
Well, I was talking to a friend recently, and he watches our show, and he says, you know, there is a general raising of consciousness in the public, you know, which is very hard to measure, but most people know something big is wrong. You know, it's hard to nail it down exactly what it is, but almost everyone who's thoughtful knows that we are in some big problems. You know, a good thing is happening in Europe right now. They're electing socialist governments. They elected a socialist government in Greece, and there was a huge opposition against that, but Greece suffered terribly under these so-called austerity measures that, you know, imposed by the International Monetary Fund and the World Bankers and all that. And now in Spain, there's a very radical movement going away from the so-called two-party system. Looks a lot like what's here in BC. And a movement, I wish I remember the name. It's Podemos, which means we can, is really covering the country right now. And there was a rally there a couple of weeks ago with 500,000 people in Madrid, and they've just come out of nowhere, and it looks like they could form the next government in Spain. So there are rapid changes happening, Jack, and for the good. And I think it's coming from that consciousness and that awareness that, you know, the people have to take back their power. We have to form governments that represent us. And this is flying in the face of the right-wing agenda in Europe right now. So they're really fighting back, and this is great.
Yeah, that is good. I hope we can see something along those lines maybe happening here in Canada as well. I just want to mention a story that began this week, which is the trial in Vancouver of the young couple that are accused of plotting the Canada Day bombing in July, I guess a year and a half ago, on the grounds of the Victoria legislature. So here's the story in the Times Colonist, I think it was today, which is Tuesday, February the 3rd. And, you know, the whole story is kind of about how they were watched by the police from the very beginning and about all the terrible things they were going to do. That's all there. And then at the very end of the story, kind of here, their lawyer says, well, you know, there's other information here. And for example, while building the bombs, Nuttall, Mr. Nuttall told Ms. Karodi that one of the undercover officers would turn into a monster if they didn't succeed, and that they could end up wearing cement galoshes at the bottom of the ocean. So it sounds like this may be what happens very often. That, I mean, what they're saying here is that they were afraid of being killed by the RCMP if they didn't carry out the bombing. I mean, that seems to be what that sentence is meaning here. Now, that was actually the original story. Once they were arrested a year and a half ago, the story began to look like it was going in that direction, that the police were deeply involved in making this happen. And yet, the media isn't telling us that story. Certainly, on the radio, when I listen to CFAX, I'm not hearing this at all. And it's very dangerous when the police are starting to carry out these kinds of things to manipulate public opinion.
Well, you know, I remember some commentary. I mean, they interviewed one of those people's mother, and her first reaction was like, "It's impossible. Somebody's put them up to this. We got to figure out who's put them up to this." And the darkened out windows and the SUVs and were pulling up by their house in the months before this event. Do you call this surveillance or is this coaching? And this is very similar to what happened in Boston. All the reports of the same thing, where the intelligence officers were pulling up to the house of these other two supposed bombers in Boston, and they tricked. They were told that obviously there was supposed to be a bombing, a drill that day, and perhaps they just thought they were participating in a drill. Nobody really knows. But again, a lot of similarities, and I am not kidding you, Jack. I just think it's completely fabricated. I think it's one of those stories, when Christy Clark showed up on the lawn of the legislature in Canada Day and said, "Hey, we're all safe and everything's wonderful," and the flag is flapping behind her. I just thought, wow, where we got to in our society when they can pull that off. I don't think anyone should believe a word of it. I really believe it's totally manufactured and fabricated. I don't know if the truth will ever get out for us, but I really think that it's just another little drill that they pulled off.
Yeah, and those, unfortunately, are the kinds of things you have to think these days, because they seem to be capable of, the people who run the country seem to be capable of, there's no depth to which they won't go. There's no depth to which they won't go. I don't fear the enemy without. I think we in Canada have to start to fear the enemy within, the people who run our country, and we have to retake control of our country, and we can do that.
It's all fake, Jack. This war on, the war on Muslims, what they call it, the war on terror, and all this stuff. This is all manufactured to manipulate us, as far as I'm concerned. I can't find any evidence to support what they're talking about. So when you can't find any other evidence other than what they're telling you, I think there was a story written about who watches the Watchers, Jack.
Yeah, who watches the Watchers, and who's going to watch us, because our time is finished. Thank you, Walter.
You're welcome, Jack.
Thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to segment 2 of Citizens Forum, being filmed in the Memorial Arena on Tuesday, February the 3rd. I'd like to thank again our volunteer crew and the Shaw staff that makes it happen. This segment is with Larry Hannant, and we're going to be talking about memorializing Canada's war in Afghanistan. So, Victoria City Council has taken the first steps towards giving approval for an $80,000 granite monument to the more than 160 Canadians who lost their lives in the Canadian military campaign in Afghanistan. Councillor Chris Coleman, who launched the initiative, says the memorial is not intended to glorify war. It's about understanding loss and celebrating the things Canada as a country does extraordinarily well. The Afghan military campaign wasn't a peacekeeping mission, he says, but it was fairly close to that. Fundraising for the monument will be undertaken by a volunteer committee. The monument is to be located in Pioneer Square at Quadra and Rockland. Historian Larry Hannant is with me to discuss this proposal and also the broader issue of memorializing wars and the casualties of war. So, hello, Larry. And
good to be here.
And why is this monument controversial?
For a couple of reasons, at least. One, in a smaller way, the location is disputed. There is a volunteer heritage committee which has overseen the I guess the tone and the upkeep of Pioneer Square, and they actually ask whether this monument to the pioneers of Victoria, the European settler pioneers, is whether a memorial to the Canadian dead in Afghanistan is appropriate for that location. So that's one aspect. And but the second, I think, which is more broad and which relates to the whole issue of of politics, the politics of the war in Afghanistan, the present sort of direction of Canadian political memorialization of war in general, is one, is this a sort of a just war to be sort of commemorated? And secondly, is there going to be somewhere on the plaque that acknowledges the extent to which Canadians in general, indeed quite consistently through the 10-year-long period of the Canadian involvement, that the public consistently, majority opinion, was opposed to the war and wanted Canadian soldiers brought home. So are these aspects going to be acknowledged? Those, I think, are a couple of the significant issues.
Can you remind me when Canada got involved in a war in Afghanistan? Do you know when it started and when it stopped?
Yes, the war against the government, the Taliban government of Afghanistan, began in November of 2001. And Canadians were involved almost immediately, and indeed there was a friendly fire. That's right. The death of 4 Canadians very quickly on, which I think helped to turn the tide. Canadians came to understand that war wasn't all clean video game style wars, that even our own soldiers could be killed by our own side, by the American.
Who was the Prime Minister then?
In 2001, it was Kray Chen still.
Okay.
Yeah. So and Kray Chen, although Kray Chen would resist sending Canadian troops to Iraq, I think the force of public opinion and the overwhelming sympathy worldwide for the United States after 9/11 did dictate that there would be some kind of Canadian involvement, because that's what George Bush tried to marshal, an international coalition or organization, right?
So, I mean, to me, when I hear about this, I think certainly what can we do to, in some way, honor and respect those who were killed? That's one thing, but even more important is we've got to make sure we have our eye on the ball so we know exactly what happened, because we don't want another 160 people killed or more in another similar situation where we're kind of misled into wars by people who seem to want war.
I think the council discussion was quite illuminating, and I was
the city council discussion.
Yes, the city council discussion last Thursday. I was encouraged to see Jeremy Loveday, a new councillor, and Ben Isett, now second term, taking on the question of what will be the inscription on the plaque, the intended plaque. Pam Madoff has taken up the heritage side of it, whether that's appropriate to be in Pioneer Square. But I think Councillor Loveday and Isett raised incisive questions about, one, whether or not this was a just war, and whether the inscription was as it was initially intended to be, improperly described it or considered it to be a just war, and whether or not the broad public opinion that was opposed to the war will be skated over or papered over, or whether it will be acknowledged. And as Ben Isett raised, I mean, he asked the question, it could be that these 160 people died in vain, that this was not a just war. And there's plenty of historical argument that would suggest that. There's a new book, Empire's Ally, it's called, about the Canadian involvement in Afghanistan, which does suggest that it was our support was there to justify imperialism, access, and control of this vital area of Central Asia. And interestingly enough, that although at the end of 2014, news stories said that the ISAF, International Security Assistance Force, had withdrawn, and it seemed to people that, that the Western presence in Afghanistan has ended. In fact, there's still 18,000 troops, including 14,000 troops, American troops, in Afghanistan, so advising the Afghan government and assisting the Afghan government. No Canadian troops, we have withdrawn there, but basically what we see is an ongoing effort essentially to keep that sort of critical sort of strategic zone, rich in resources, in the Western sort of sphere of influence and under Western control for political and economic purposes.
And it's not only 160 Canadians who died, but thousands who were wounded, and I think many thousands who are suffering from the after effects of what war does to people. I mean, it's a huge, huge price that a lot of people have paid. And you sort of see the government, the Harper government, turning their backs on these people all the time, while at the same time pretending that they care.
I think that is a big issue, in some ways beyond the question that's local, that the Victoria City Council is taking up. The treatment of the sort of, returned veterans is a matter of very considerable controversy. Yeah, yeah.
So, does what's happening in Victoria, the discussion of a monument, fit into similar things in the way this country is now paying attention to war in general and this war?
I think it does, and that's regrettable. What we see increasingly in Canada is this military nationalism. This is becoming the reigning political philosophy of the government of Canada. And that is this celebration of wars in the past. We see a huge devotion of monies to the celebration of wars, the War of 1812, the beginning of the First World War 100-year anniversary. And then the plan is in sort of 2016 to spend $83 million to commemorate the 100th anniversary. 2017 to commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Vimy battle, but also to mark the anniversary in 1936 when the Vimy Memorial in France was first erected. So I think we see this new sense from the government of Canada that celebrating wars is good politics. It gives Canadians a sense of pride in victories, and that we always are on the right side. And it was, I think, mimicked by Councillor Coleman, and he's my neighbor. I have great conversations across the backyard with him. But I think this idea that there, as he says, Canadians do some things extraordinarily well. That's getting into this kind of celebratory, sort of self-congratulatory sort of approach where we, no matter what we do, we regard this as a success. And my sense in monuments, in the direction of monuments, is that we should be increasingly moving towards erecting monuments to our folly, to understanding our mistakes, because it's in mistakes that we are constantly reminded not to go down that path again, not to make those what seem to be sometimes even popular or automatic responses to lash out, to act sort of militarily or decisively. And I can think of many kinds of monuments to our folly that we could erect in Victoria, for example. How about a monument, for example, in Bastion Square to, I believe it's 6 Cowichan Aboriginal men who were hanged there for their resistance to a military sort of attack, essentially, launched by sort of Governor James Douglas in the 1850s. There are many possibilities where we can sort of essentially not just sort of show people the other side of our history, but constantly remind them about that not just our history, but the history of humanity is rife with error, and we need to be cautious about that constantly.
And not only rife with error, but rife with outright evil and manipulation. And we've got to have our eyes open as we move ahead that there are people out there in our country who, for their own reasons, want war. I mean, we can see it. I see it every night if I watch the national news on either CBC or CTV. They seem to be pushing us into the next war and ignoring the truth, which is not a good thing to do.
And I think the Joint Task Force 2 engagements in the past couple of weeks in Iraq is a good illustration of that. The military justification of that, the argument that these troops, Joint Task Force 2, the special troops in Iraq, they were fired upon, and therefore they have the right to self-defense, and therefore they fired back. This is, I think, it is a slippery slope, and it will soon enough produce much more complete, more engaging action, and it could well result in deaths. Certainly, it appears to have resulted in the deaths of Iraqis. Now it could lead to the death of Canadians as well.
And further attacks in Canada that they will blame on ISIS, and further changes to our laws, and the complete removal of our democracy. I mean, I think that's the direction our leadership seems to be taking us in, and I mean our corporate leadership as well as the political leadership. You want to talk a bit more about Vimy and the term Vimyism?
Yeah, Vimyism, I think, is one. It's a phrase that's coined by an historian, Ian Mackay, who has along with Jamie Swift, has a really good book called Warrior Nation that is an examination of this new military ethic and the ideology of celebrating the military that has been sort of pursued by the government of Canada over the past while. Vimyism is the idea that it was whatever was done was right, and interestingly enough, in 1936, when the memorial to the Battle of Vimy Ridge was set up, the Canadian Prime Minister at the time, William Lyon Mackenzie King, actually he wasn't there to unveil it, but when he did go the next year to look at the memorial, and he was in Europe for other purposes, was appalled at how militaristic it was. He was actually shocked and surprised, because he thought what this does is that it's a discredit to the Canadians who died in the First World War, because it seems to present the idea that this was a justified action, and that death in battle is always a victory. It's always a justifiable and proper action. So, even at times past, our own Canadian prime ministers have been concerned about this valorization of the military ethic, and the tendency, as you've suggested, it has to throw us pell-mell into another engagement for another just cause. It's interesting to see, when we come back to this issue of how how to mark history, and my suggestion that we should be we should have monuments to our folly. A few years ago, I was in East Berlin, and I came across what I thought was just a great example of this, and how it personalized history and challenged the ordinary person on the street to ask, what did you do and what was your stand, and were the people of that day. And I was walking down this street in East Berlin, and I came across this plaque in the sidewalk, a bronze plaque in the sidewalk, which said something to the effect of, on August 23rd, 1943, the Cohen family, was taken from this apartment, number 381, and taken to Auschwitz. They named them. So Hannah and Joseph and Misha and Maida, they were taken, ages and everything, they were taken to Auschwitz. And here you are, you're just walking down the street, and you look at that, and you look at the building is still there, and you say, they took them, they came for those people. And implicitly, I think that one must interrogate oneself. What did my people do then? What would I do today under similar circumstances?
And those are exactly the circumstances we're in today. Larry, thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
And thanks for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome back to the third of 4 segments of Citizens Forum today. Our guest in this segment is Mazen Al-Nahawi. And Mazen, we're going to start off by talking about the hypocrisy of Stephen Harper.
Yeah, actually 2 days ago, Stephen Harper was in a meeting with the group, supportive group, and as we know lately, he never take question from public. He always give a speech to be group support his policy. He called the Islamic fundamentalist radical as the greatest evil. For me, I advocate for a democratic secular society, which when I say secular, I mean religious. There is no religious involvement here. We, long time ago, I think from the 15th century, especially in Western society, understood that separation between a church or any religious institution and the state, it's very fundamental to have a real democratic society. The hypocrisy here when we have a person like Stephen Harper, who is religiously, it's fundamental religious, who believe in the evangelical line, who represent 12% here in Canada, and believe in many religious mythology. It's really hypocrisy for him to go and criticize another religion. He should leave that to somebody really secular or somebody anti the whole establishment or religion and their bad influence on society to take on that role. So, for example, in a real tolerant society, when you have multiple religion in it, to come from one group to lecture and criticize another group, it's kind of unacceptable. You usually, if there is some radical Christian, the Muslim and Jews should leave it to the Christian culture or society to take care of this issue. They cannot take the role on criticizing the other religion because they are themselves a religion, and they have here kind of conflict of interest. If you can see here, they're already in religion, conflict religion beneath, so you cannot go on talk to the Muslim that no, you are so evil and you are a religious Christian. This is you
and especially when it's not true, and especially when, I mean, we keep hearing about ISIS as the great threat and the great fundamentalist threat, but again, I'll say it again, everybody says ISIS is run by and controlled by and funded by the United States. Why won't Harper or any of the politicians or our media ever talk about that issue? Maybe I'm wrong when I say it, maybe I'm making a mistake, but there are people all over the world saying the same thing, and yet in Canada, it's as if the idea has never been mentioned.
If you Google about where the whole terms about Islamic terrorism started, it's go back to the 1979 when we have the whole Mujahideen issue in Afghanistan, used by the U.S. government, opening the Pandora box, and the time also when the Khomeini and in Iran. Then we start that wave of criticizing the Muslim radical, and many states, like the Israeli occupation state, use that just to gain support for their Jewish state as a colonial settler state in the Middle East to get stronger ground when you now focus on the Islamist terrorism. But the other side of the hypocrisy here, that when you aid a state like Saudi Arabia, who are the th- behind the whole Wahhabi fundamentalism and fanatic idea. The Wahhabi
So Saudi Arabia has long been a funder of fundamentalist Islam.
and actually Saudi Arabia itself was created by the British and later maintained by the American. So when Stephen Harper sell weapon to the Saudi government, and from the other hand go and talk about Islamic terrorism, I don't know how that fit. Also,
That's been completely ignored. The fact that Canada was just involved in was it 10 or 15 billion dollar arms sale to Saudi Arabia. I mean, that gets covered over as if it never happened.
Actually, I don't really condone the Syrian dictator government, but they alarm us from before about supporting these radicals will bring them back to your capitals, to Paris and London or wherever. That, in the beginning, when the Western government went and support all these Islamist radical groups who went to Syria to get rid of Bashar al-Assad. Bashar al-Assad at that time was saying, okay, these guys are coming back to you guys and is going to do trouble because you are aiding them now. And it's now, nobody mentioned anything about that. It's there, it's the new enemy now. Another example, very, very important, especially as a Palestinian, for somebody come to my home, knock on my door, tell me, God promised me your home, get the heck out of here. And you have a government, Stephen Harper and John Baird, support this policy and these fanatic. How dare they turn from the other side and talk about Islamic fanatic? All of them are in the same hole. I am, as a secular person, I don't want involvement from any religious institution in my community, not in Palestine and not in Canada. And Canadians need to be really, really very wary to have somebody in public office motivated and believe in a religious belief kind of does not really fit with the 21st century.
Yeah, and it's interesting that because the media supports Harper and is behind him, and because he works for the same people who own the media, they always gloss that over. They gloss over a lot of things about Stephen Harper. I mean, he could be out of office a dozen times over based on what he's done. But every time the media covers it over because he's giving corporate Canada everything they want. It's the enemy within that we have to fear. We've just got a minute or two left. I don't know what you'd like to cover.
It's just emphasizing that to have a government represent us, we're really based on civil, secular, democratic principle. This is very important. And to have a government go from one hand criticize a religion, on the other hand covering up for other fanatic religions because it's fit with their colonial. Actually, in the last couple hundred years we have the same colonialist mentality where any organic communities outside the capitalist system, if they don't allow that system to go there, then this organic community is a terrorist community, it's savage community, it's against our principle of democracy, and we have to occupy them and bomb them to bring democracy to their country, which is in reality just to be able to make our business here have a full freedom to go there and do whatever they want to. So from one hand, when Stephen Harper go and support a state like Saudi Arabia or the Israeli occupation state in Palestine, and there later to talk about fundamentalist Muslim, people should be worried about who is this guy. And one other example, very, very important here, his stand on apartheid. The whole career of Stephen Harper started with a group called Northern Frontier, I think, and it was the main goal from that group to keep Mandela in prison and to support the apartheid in South Africa. So that the racist beginning also, it's nobody question it. So there is many things media can do to question the Harper regime.
Thank you, Mazen. And thank you for watching this segment of Citizens Forum. Welcome to the last segment of Citizens Forum, being filmed on Tuesday, February the 3rd. 2015. Our guest in this segment is Will Smith. And Will, we're going to start off by talking about something that, well, nobody will have heard this before, but kin domains.
Yes, I want to talk about that. I just want to give a little background about, I have a hard time engaging in politics, as I've mentioned on past shows, and I was trying to think, it seems to me that we're entering this time, or we've been in this time when politics is really, it has less to do with governance and more to do with putting on a show. And I mean, to me, as a person who spent a lot of time living in different cultures and being a gypsy, I just look at some of the things going on, and like the case that with the pressure cooker stuff that's going on, and I just look at that and I think, well, they're just having a hard time here because of limited resources, changing from a law enforcement agency to a drama department, and they don't have a good casting department yet. So I mean, the people who are available to fulfill these roles, sometimes you have to pick somebody who's not, people who are just not really up to the role. I mean, and you look at Hollywood, they spend a lot of money doing these productions, and even then you can still look on these movie sites and they have little people who point out little glitches. And I mean, I'm from Arizona originally, and we have a saying there that never mud wrestle with a pig, because the pig likes it and you're probably going to lose. So I'm not going to go there. I'm not going to wrestle with people who don't understand that what's really going on supersedes any of this stuff. I mean, we're in the middle of I think the biggest problem right now is just survival, because there's a lot of stuff going on. We're looking at things that are arguably as dramatic as the extinction of the dinosaurs. So I think that's what each of us really needs to be worried about, is what are we going to do as we go through these changes that are going on? How am I going to get food? So anyway, I'm looking for things that are news in that regard, not things that are manufactured to control us and to keep our eyes away from what's really going on. And the biggest thing that I find is in Russia, because Russia has a problem. You can see Russia has a problem, the same problems that other countries have, but they have an additional problem that people have left. They're leaving. So they want to attract people to stay. Their population is declining despite the fact that they're the largest country in the world, and it has been for many years. So they're coming up with ways to keep people there. And there's a bill in the Duma, the Russian legislature, right now to gift 2.5 acres or 1 hectare to any family that asks for it, so that they can have a domain. They call it a kin domain, and produce food. And the interesting thing about it is that while we're taking apart the Magna Carta, we've already done that, and the Bill of Rights in the United States, probably a lot of the rights here have been taken out too. People are realizing over there that personal sovereignty is important, and that you can't treat people like that. So from the standpoint of people who want to live in Russia, they like what's going on. And from the government of Russia, who like Putin is obviously the figurehead, they have to deal with the Western sanctions and the World Trade Organization damaging their economy. So this is kind of an end run or an asymmetric response to the Western sanctions, that people can produce their own food and there is no taxes. There are no taxes on the food and no taxes on the land. So what do you think about that as an idea? Does that sound pretty revolutionary?
As an idea, it sounds great. I think it sounds great. I mean, I don't know anything about it, except what you've told me over a short period of time. I like the idea. On the ground, how does it work? What does it mean? I don't know, but I like the idea.
Well, it's been happening at the local level, but this makes it at a national level and would make it so that there are no, I mean, it's really, if you think about it, this is really a huge thing, because it's granting individual groups, families, really, it's a kin domain, so it's meant for families, a great deal of sovereignty. And it's also, the intent is to care for the land and produce food. So arguably we're at this pinch point in the history where humans have to start worrying about that again, because we've spent quite a bit of time and energy destroying the place.
Yeah.
making it uninhabitable and making it more difficult to grow food. So I'd like to see some interest here, or at least discussion about it in the news and, you know, among the people that I speak with about what are the possibilities for doing something like here. It seems like that here. It seems like there's a lot of crown land available.
Well, you know, like for example, the small family farm. This used to be a nation of a lot of small family farms, and now they've almost been completely wiped out. So, I mean, even if we could move in that direction, where we could once again support lots and lots of families on small family farms and have them make a living off of working the farm and providing us with good food, I mean, to me, that would also be a great thing, and that's something I think many of us can envision in our minds. Instead of the family farm is gone and everything's been replaced by the corporate agribusiness giant.
Yeah, people still feel very confident here because they can jump in their car and drive and buy groceries, but in places like Russia or places that went through where there was fighting on the ground in World War II, people haven't forgotten that food is not guaranteed. And so they're much closer to that. And in fact, in Russia right now, over 50% of the food is produced by these small plots, these small family plots that are usually just worked on the weekends. And of course, it's all organic. So
it would be interesting to be able to show people, you know, how it's actually working on the ground and what it all means. You wanted to talk a little bit about maybe we are being managed. Do you want to? We've only got a couple of minutes left.
Well, it's pretty obvious. I mean, you can. I think that if you just look at these things that are going on, I mean, the casting obviously was better in Ottawa and arguably in Paris too. But I mean, it's just the power of nightmares. You can go on archive.org on the internet and watch a BBC special called "The Power of Nightmares," which just shows all these politicians are from a generation. They were taught a certain philosophy that people need to be managed, and this is how you do it. You create a crisis, and you get them fighting, and then you control things. It's there. I mean, it's not a mystery.
Yeah. So I guess a bit of the mystery is how we move away from where we are and into something a little bit better. Can you give us a first?
Well, this thing that's going on in Russia is exciting because, I mean, this is what's going to happen. At some point, people are going to go, gee, the rainforests are disappearing. Gee, we need some food. I think the best thing we can do is, well, don't listen to anything that politicians are saying. Just watch what they do. It's a completely different story. It's nothing like what they say. And then just watch what the animals are doing. The animals know what's going on. They really do know what's going on. So start watching what animals are doing all over the world.
You know what? I have been a little bit, just because I've happened to spend a bit of time in some of the most beautiful and quietest parks in Victoria, a bit away from it all, and you watch, you know, they're so strong, they're so tough, they have nothing. They don't even have a chair, they don't have any clothes, they've got nothing, and they're out there surviving, and we, on the other hand, have so much.
Well, we just work in an atmosphere of fear. So getting over that, I don't know, I think of it, the image I got was, if somebody offered you the idea that you could have a pay-per-view of the dinosaur extinction, would you go for it? I would. Here we are. Let's have fun.
Will, thank you very much.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And thanks for watching this week's Citizens Forum.